All right, just a quick one on the Adam Kownacki fight on the weekend on the undercard of Edgar Berlanga. He fought a guy called Joe Cusumano, and it ended up being a defeat for Kownacki, his fourth defeat in a row, which may signal the end of his boxing career. Now, Kownacki has never had a defense, but up until the Robert Helenius fights, he'd always shown a really impressive chin. He'd been in there against big guys, guys who could punch, and he'd been able to take their power without showing any serious signs of being hurt. I'm sure there's been times he was buzzed prior to that, but he was never out on his feet, noticeably rocked back or down. The only time I can remember him being visibly buzzed, but again, he wasn't like out on his feet, was when he fought Charles Martin prior to those Helenius fights. But those Helenius fights seem to have put a real dent in Adam Kownacki's punch resistance. In this fight against Cusumano, he was hurt and dropped in the first round by some of the first clean punches that landed. This is the same guy who was walking through people like Gerald Washington, walking through his punches, paying no attention to them. And perhaps Cusumano hits a lot harder than Gerald Washington, but even Chris Arreola, for example, who does have decent power, who did drop Andy Ruiz. Kownacki was walking through his shots as well. So to me, this is an example of a guy who, due to his complete absence of defense, has been getting hit far too much, and that has caused his punch resistance to deteriorate over time. That being said, he climbed up off the canvas against Cusumano. The referee gave him every opportunity with what seemed like a relatively long count. Kownacki has always had a lot of support in New York from the Polish contingent. There's a lot of Polish people in New York, and I think even more in Chicago. Some of them may have traveled to watch him. So I'm saying that there was, in my opinion, bias from the officials in favor of Kownacki here, because he was also given extra time to recover at the start of one of the rounds after being hurt in a previous round. It reminded me of when Deontay Wilder was given extra time to recover after he got hurt by Luis Ortiz. So the doctor didn't examine him within the minute time allotted between rounds, but instead waited for that minute to expire and then delayed the start of the next round in order to conduct an examination of him. So they did that in the Wilder-Ortiz fight. They also did it here with Kownacki against Cusumano. There was a later round in the fight where they actually examined both fighters. But again, it's my opinion that they just did that so it wouldn't look so blatantly obvious that they were doing Kownacki a favor, because Cusumano didn't look like he needed to be examined to me. Kownacki was taking an awful lot of shots, and he did look like he needed to be examined. But again, you can examine him in between rounds. Now, some people might argue that the corner team may have blocked the doctors or whatever from doing that because they want the 1 minute to give Kownacki instructions. But as far as I'm concerned, the doctors should be able to override that. And I've seen them do that in the past in many fights where they'll literally come into the corner. Now, sometimes you do get the corner man, the trainer, complaining that the doctor's eating into his time. But like I say, I've seen them do that. In any event, it was a back and forth seesaw battle between Kownacki and Cusumano. Kownacki looked like he was completely out of it in the first round. Didn't look like it would last long. Was very reminiscent of what happened to him against Robert Helenius. But he's somehow, with his family in attendance, with some Polish fans in the crowd, managed to muster up some resistance in that massive heart of his, and he does have a massive heart. And he mounted a comeback in several of the rounds, and they were going back and forth with their punches. But Cusumano's punches, to me, always looked the sharper. They looked the more damaging. They were landing more flush. Cusumano's biggest battle to me wasn't really Kownacki's punches, it was his own stamina. But even that held out for him in the end and proved to be superior to Kownacki's stamina. Kownacki, despite getting dropped and shaken on numerous occasions, particularly early in the fight, he did start to warm up to the punches as the fight progressed. And that can sometimes happen. Early in a fight, when you're cold, you get hit, you get buzzed, maybe you go down. But sometimes after that, you get hit a few more times and you can start to take the shots better. It doesn't shock your system as much. You become acclimatized. That can sometimes happen. Hence the term being caught cold. But as I say, the fight progressed. It always to me looked like Cusumano was in the driving seat, even though Kownacki did come back at him, pushing back to the ropes and landed some shots here and there. Cusumano was just holding his shape better. There were times in this fight when Kownacki was falling over his own feet, when he looked unsteady, even when he hadn't taken any punches. You know, like that. And that's obviously not a good sign. And when you're looking at Cusumano's legs, they look way fresher, holding his shape better, moving better. So to me, it was only a matter of time. And that time came in the 8th round. Cusumano put some shots together, real clean ones, drove Kownacki back into the ropes, at which point the towel came in, and I think the referee was already going to stop it anyway. Some people say it could have been stopped earlier. Well, yeah, I mean, it could have been stopped in the 1st round, to be fair. The 2nd round or 3rd round, definitely earlier on in the fight. In fact, the commentators said at one point that either the manager, I think it was the manager or the promoter of Kownacki, actually spoke to Kownacki's family who were there in attendance and asked them if they wanted the fight to be stopped. And apparently they said, no, let it go on. I mean, that's a brave family. So there was lots of concern for Kownacki's health. I haven't heard any updates on his health, but I hope he's okay. Immediately after the fight, the first thing I said in my Element group is Kownacki needs to be taken to a hospital straight away. And I mean straight away. Never mind post-fight interviews and all that. Certainly forget about post-fight press conferences. They need to get this guy to the hospital immediately because it's exactly fights like this that go several rounds. You know, this fight ended in the 8th where one guy is just taking constant clean punches to the head and he's fatigued. It's fights like this where serious injuries can occur. And I was happy to see that when the verdict of Cusumano winning by TKO was announced and the referee was holding his arm aloft, Kownacki was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, he'd been taken to the hospital right away, as I had hoped he would be. And you know, in a funny kind of way, this fight really was a fitting way for Kownacki to go out because it summed up his career as a whole. He had moments of success. He was very exciting and compelling to watch, but ultimately, he just wasn't good enough. I hope he retires off the back of that. Of course, that will be based upon his health and based upon whether he's made enough money to do all the things he wants to do in his life. If he hasn't, don't be shocked to see Adam Kownacki back in a professional boxing ring at some stage in the future. If he can't get licensed in the US, he might go back to Poland and get licensed. It's like Danny Williams. The British board took his British license off him, so he went over to Eastern Europe and started boxing over there. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? Anyway, that's my take on Kownacki's fight against Cusumano. And Cusumano, by the way, no great shakes. 22-4 with 20 KOs, so he can punch. But his 3 losses were to Daniel Martz, who's no great shakes himself, and that was back in 2012. Robert Sims, who's another less than impressive fighter. Steve Vukosa, who's a guy in his 40s. And most recently, Daniel Dubois, who managed to get Cusumano out of there in the 1st round back in 2021. Some of you may remember that fight. This is, by a long way, the best win of Cusumano's career against Adam Kownacki. But let's be real, it's a very faded Adam Kownacki that he defeated. Nevertheless, congratulations to him. And as I say, let me know what you guys thought about the fight with Kownacki. If you've got any updates about his health, I'm assuming he's okay, but if you've got any updates, leave them in the comment section. And do you agree that it's time for him to retire? Let me know.
Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.